The following is a presentation of Geekster Media.
Summers in the 80s watching TV, dancing lazy, can't believe that's how I spent all my time. Every day I watch a show and it's the one that you all know. Wacky stories of those kids who went to Bayside High. It's alright, cause you remember that. It's alright, say you remember that. It's alright, do you remember that show? Welcome to Do You Recall That Television Program? The audio discussion series where we re-examine the social issues that inspired the streaming entertainment of the 21st century. In this episode, we put an ill-fated reimagining of a sexist, outdated Saturday morning sitcom through the Bechdel test. Okay, I just can't do it, Will. I know we want more listeners, but reimagining our podcast this way is just, it's not true to our old school TV-loving ways. What's next? Remember That Murder? Actually, I'm pretty sure that true crime podcast already exists. Anyway, hey there, TV lovers. I'm Adam Pope, and this is Remember That Show?
I do, because I'm William Bruce West, and this is the podcast where we revisit the obscure or forgotten TV shows of the 80s and 90s, or in this case, a mostly ignored relaunch of a classic series for modern times. We are at the end of our Saved by the Summer series, where we have been examining the Saved by the Bell prequels, sequels, and spin-offs. It's all come to this.
That's right. But before we see what life was like for students at Bayside High in 2020, we've got to explore our own TV-obsessed lives in a segment we call Theme Song. So, well, even though we've talked about sequel series and relaunches a lot as we've gone through Saved by the Summer, these would include things like The New Addams Family, or The New Adam 12, or The New Monkeys. Honestly, how new could they be, right? Everything's new, so they say. But the show we're dealing with today is part of a new trend called a reimagining, which is starting with an older existing TV property and then taking it in a new direction. For example, Peacock launched a series called Bel-Air, which is a dramatic version of the wacky sitcom The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air from the 90s. It's like same basic setup, very different tone, right? So you watch a lot more modern TV than I do, Will. So what I want to know is, are there any TV show reimaginings of the last 20 years that you think actually worked?
No. I tried to research this because none were really coming to mind. There's the whole thing of like reboot versus revival versus reimagining, and most things fall into the reboot revival camp. Saved by the Bell 2020 is the first time I felt that the production side of things really pushed forward the reimagining aspect of it. It wasn't the first time I had heard that, but it was the first time it got like a big push to it. So it kind of accompanied a wave of these things, but none of them have been great. Like you mentioned Bel-Air, and I hear there's one in development for Martin, which is the same kind of, they're gonna take a serious tone on Martin Lawrence being a DJ at WZUP and all that. And I'm like, really? But one that was really controversial recently, and it really falls into this reimagining camp, is Good Times. There is an animated Good Times on Netflix. It was really coasting on the fact that Norman Lear signed off on it, but it's a modernization. So you still got the Evans family in the ghetto dealing with modern day ghetto issues, but it's problematic for a lot of reasons, because if you look at it, just like the character designs look horrible. It's almost reminiscent of the PJs, if you remember that from Fox, where it's very stereotypical. But another problem people have, I don't know if you're familiar with Good Times, but Good Times is 5 years of just tragedy. It's a sitcom, but nothing goes right for this family. And then in the end, the very final episode, they finally get out of the ghetto. But because this is not a reboot, it's a reimagining in the same kind of timeline universe, it implies at some point the Evans family ends up back in the ghetto. And that's like the heartbreaking thing. You know, it's almost like there's an episode of Sliders where they actually do make it home, but like Quinn Mallory, his litmus test of whether they're home is if his front gate squeaks. He tests the gate, doesn't squeak. He's like, this isn't our home. They slide off. And then you see his mom with an oil can because she had just oiled the gate. It's that heartbreaking kind of thing right there. So it's like, there are a ton of reimaginings out there, but none are good. Like this that we're talking about tonight is probably one of the best. And even it has its issues. This is a concept in its infancy that maybe isn't designed to work, but there's certainly some kinks that need to be ironed out if they're going to figure this whole thing out. What about you?
Well, like, I think most of the examples I came up with also probably fall more into the reboot category. Like, for example, Hawaii Five-0. Like, that started in 2010, Scott Kahn, you got Daniel Day Kim. Like, that lasted for 10 seasons. My wife binged the whole thing. I, sat in for a few episodes. I generally enjoyed it. Like, so there was that. There was, like, the Battlestar Galactica reboot had a lot of fans, It lasted longer than the original series. The one that I was going to point to, but really it's out of our 20-year time frame that I was bringing up, but the 90s Land of the Lost reboot, I guess, on ABC, like that was a favorite of mine as a kid, but it had good costumes, it had good effects, but it really was just the same premise, just updated. It wasn't a reimagining, so to speak. So
I'll say, like, this is sacrilege to a lot of people. To me, that's Land of the Lost. I didn't know it was a remake. Like I remember because it kind of was in the same era of Saved by the Bell where I'm like, oh, so ABC has their live action Saturday morning show. And it's like, I watched it, but I had no clue one had come before,
Yeah, me neither. And the crazy thing is, so I've had a VHS copy of the 90s series for quite a while that I found at a thrift store. And I just this last week found one from the 70s. The tape is not from the 70s, but it's a few episodes from the 70s series. And I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. And that's obviously when Will Ferrell made his movie, he was basing it on that. So, but I feel like that's a contender for a future episode. So we won't get into it too far with Land of the Lost now. But what we do need to figure out is why this reimagining was conceived. Why did they feel it was the right time to come back to Bayside? So we got to find out why it got the green light.
Well, in the 20 years following the cancellation of Saved by the Bell, the new class, the original Saved by the Bell series continued to be seen in syndication around the world, and a new generation of kids discovered this retro teen sitcom that reflected their parents' childhoods. There were some attempts to sully the reputation of the show and its stars, with Dustin Diamond's mostly made up Behind the Bell tell-all book, a malicious memoir that ended up being adapted into a TV movie for the E-Cable network called The Unauthorized Saved by the Bell in 2014. But also during this time, a nostalgia for the Bayside Kids began to surface in pop culture as Jimmy Fallon convinced Mark Paul Gosselaar to be interviewed in character as Zach Morris, which eventually led to a full cast reunion sketch on his show, minus Dustin Diamond as Screech, who was ostracized because of the book. Soon, there were pop-up restaurants designed to look like the Max, and even an unauthorized parody musical based on the show. In 2019, NBC decided to capitalize on this nostalgia and bring subscribers to their new Peacock streaming service by announcing a new Saved by the Bell series from showrunner Tracy Wigfield, who had worked with Tina Fey on 30 Rock. More about that shortly. Adam, how plugged into the Saved by the Bell nostalgia were you during this 20-year period? Were you excited by the announcement of a new series?
Like I said last episode, so I ended my relationship with new Saved by the Bell after sampling the first season of the new class. I still watched the reruns when they were on, but I was like, no new class for me. And then after graduating from high school, I would say I pretty much left the series behind for about 6 or 7 years, mainly because I never graduated to like having satellite TV. I stopped having cable. In college, I really didn't watch anything until it was on physical media. Like unless I was at a friend's house and I happened to catch an episode of like Lost or something, right? And then I became more of a film guy than a TV guy pretty much through the 2000s. I was always just at the movies, renting movies, trying to catch up on all that history. But then I did start buying the individual season sets of Saved by the Bell on DVD, revisiting it, really enjoying that. And at that time in the mid 2000s is when I started getting into retro blogging, kind of joining that community, contributing articles to a site called Retro Junk. Then I got invited over to Retro Days, where I wrote several Saved by the Bell articles in my time there. And then I started writing a web series for the Retro Days YouTube channel called RD's Retro Detention, which was about a Zach Morris style character who was always causing trouble for his principal while sharing vintage retro pop culture items. I also starred in it, I should say. I was RD. But that RD character was created because I found some vintage clothes that made me think of AC Slater, something he would wear. It was actually, I talked about living in a dead guy's house in a previous episode. My next door neighbors died and they had all their stuff out in their car park, and they were older and their kids were trying to clear everything out. I was like, can I pick through this stuff? And they're like, yeah. And I found like these old acid wash jeans. I found this super awesome like tank top that I wore. So I made this little video because I had also just randomly in a thrift store found a vintage high school desk. And I was just like, I have everything I could want to be on Saved by the Bell. And so I made this short little video and then I just put it up online, and they're like, oh, we should make a series out of that, my buddy Tony at Retro Days. So anyway, I had the Saved by the Bell attitude in mind as I was doing all that. And then I actually planned to go to that pop-up, the Max restaurant. Like, I had been following it for the months since it had launched, and I was all excited. And I had a trip to Los Angeles scheduled. I was going for a concert to meet with my friends, but that trip was the week after it officially closed, and I missed it. And I was so bummed because I was just like, oh, I wanted to be at the Max. So as for this new series, though, when that finally came around, the announcement, I was excited. I mean, obviously the original cast returning was kind of like, oh, what are they going to do with it? I'm seeing some scenes of Slater. I'm seeing all these different things coming up. But I was more interested in seeing what a modern day version of the show would be like. And I was so curious, I subscribed to Peacock just so I could watch it. Nothing else they were doing interested me. So yeah, I mean, I was pretty gung-ho and ready for it. But how about you? Were you skeptical?
No, I mean, I would grasp at any Saved by the Bell crumb I could get over that period. By this point, even though it was still kind of in syndication, it was mainly like cable syndication. And I mean, my second catchphrase is I didn't grow up with cable. So even as an adult, like, I didn't steadily have cable in my 20s. So I had the DVDs too. Like, I've had oh my gosh, there's so many different releases. Like, I've had both of them, and I just bought one recently, because they always claim to be the complete series, but they're the syndicated cut. But like, every time they put one out, I'll get it. So like, I had those and I would watch those, and there's some seasons I considered were a chore and some that weren't, but I would just like put in the disc and let it run, I'd fall asleep to it sometimes. So anytime there was like an interview, anytime there was like a chance of them getting back together, my curiosity was piqued by Saved by the Smell. I've never seen it. I never sought it out. But at that time, I was like, oh, I kind of want to see Screech just hit rock bottom, So like, and I mean, the thing people forget is the Fallon thing. That was before he even got the Tonight Show. That was before the like Conan drama, where like Fallon had the Conan slot at this point, and he was trying to do the reunion. He worked so hard, he got Mark Paul to do that, and it would never come together. So as a consolation prize, he did the California Dreams reunion.
Yeah.
And that actually meant more to me. And that went so well, the other Saved by the Bell people, it seemed like it kind of convinced them like, okay, this is something to take seriously. And I feel like maybe he finally got the Tonight Show by the time he got them together, but people don't realize it was a long process because it really seemed like a labor of love from Fallon. Like, he grew up with that like a lot of us. This is a tangent that I'll try to stay off of, but like, I feel bad on how we currently think of Jimmy Fallon because he's just kind of like this throwaway joke, and I get that like his SNL legacy is he breaks. He broke in all of his sketches. But like that never really bothered me because a lot of that era wasn't great anyway. But also it's just kind of like I have always liked Jimmy Fallon because I felt he was one of us. He knows he shouldn't be famous. He like snuck in, you know? And it's like now that he's there, he hasn't changed. He's gonna be his dumb, goofy self. Now, sometimes that backfires like politically, but like when he got in there, I was like, if Jimmy Fallon weren't on TV and he lived in Maryland, I'd probably be his friend. And I'd probably get annoyed by him sometime because he seems like that guy who's always on. But like I followed this whole reunion thing. So when they got together there, that was awesome to me. So hearing about this series, of course, I was glad they were getting the band back together. There was the question of would everyone show up? Because I feel like Dustin should have been invited. So it was dicey at that point. But I was hesitant because of Tracy Wigfield.
Okay. We'll explore that further then. But let's talk about that because to help promote the launch of Peacock Saved by the Bell, Mark Paul Gosselaar teamed up with a writer on the show, Dashiell Driscoll, for a podcast called Zach to the Future. We've mentioned it before. Driscoll had gotten the gig, really, to work on this Saved by the Bell reimagining by creating a web series called Zach Morris's Trash that pointed out what a terrible human being the character was in a humorous way. And Zach to the Future, though, found Mark Paul sharing behind-the-scenes stories of each episode of the series as they watched it, sometimes with his former castmates, sometimes who were becoming, co-producers of the Peacock series. But unfortunately, when the reimagining was canceled after 2 seasons, Zach to the Future died as well. Just 50 episodes. Now, shortly thereafter, Driscoll did post on Twitter about the fate of the series and the podcast. He said, quote, "We tried to get season 3 going on a new network, but unfortunately couldn't make it work. Not saying it won't ever happen, but it's likely not happening now." And yes, it hasn't happened. But luckily, there was a podcast called Go Bayside, which was hosted by comedian April Richardson that ran for many more years, that did a review of every episode of the series, sometimes with cast members, writers, producers, like they were all providing their behind the scenes insight, which it was interesting if you compare the two. So Will, did you listen to both or just one of these podcasts?
I just learned about Go Bayside from you, but I was an avid listener of Zach to the Future. I was there from the beginning, but like getting together for this episode, I realized I wasn't really cognizant of the timing of everything. Like, even though Zach to the Future launched just before the Peacock series, I never thought of it as a promotional vehicle for the Peacock series. It was like, even though Dashiell was a writer and even though Mark Paul had involvement with it, it was still too early in the... Well, first off, Mark Paul still had Mixed-ish. So it was like he wasn't really available. Like the fact that he was only allowed to do the 3 episodes of the first season, and that's what like SAG would allow. But my deal is they mention or refer to the reimagining so little that you wouldn't really think that this was in any way, like it was a coincidence it happened to be released at the time the show was on, you know? Like sometimes Driscoll might say something that happened in the writer's room of the reimagining, but for the most part, it was its own autonomous thing. It's just, it also happened to die at the time of the reimagining. So I guess it makes sense, but I'm just saying on air, they didn't really make that many ties to the series itself. I've only seen like one Zach Morris's Trash, and I saw that after I had heard about the podcast, because I don't like video. Like online, it's not a medium I like. I like to read or I like to listen, but video is just like, if it's over 3 minutes, I have like a Gen Z attention span. So like I went to look at it and it's like, I feel like after 1 or 2, you get the point, but this dude made a series, but it worked. Because it got him work, you know? And I really enjoyed the podcast because while we didn't learn much from Mark Paul, because he has selective memory, selective amnesia, and it's certainly an era he's not proud of. Like what people may not know about this podcast is the premise of it is Mark Paul Gosselaar claims he's never watched the show. So this isn't even like a rewatch podcast for him. This is a watch podcast. Like, he never watched it after he filmed it, and it was filmed in so many parts, he doesn't know all the plots. He doesn't know how things are resolved. So you're watching it for the first time with him in a way, and he's so hard on himself as far as his abilities as an actor at that time, or things he was ashamed of at that time. So you kind of learn more about him. Like, I'd love to say he lets his guard down after a while, but I almost feel like he goes back into his shell near episode 50 because real life was getting in the way. Like, once Mixedish gets canceled, he has to re-enter pilot season and get another job. So it's like, this podcast thing really doesn't matter to me for a show I did 3 guest stints on when I got a mortgage to pay, you know? So he's right back to getting another Fox show that was canceled after 1 season. But like, this is one of those podcasts I looked forward to weekly.
Yeah, I was very excited by the whole idea, but like you said, Mark Paul is kind of a downer, and he always reminds the listeners, I didn't watch this, I didn't really care about it, it was a job, basically. Like, I love my castmates, and we had fun, but he always didn't want to talk about the show. He wanted to talk about just like life surrounding the show, and it was Dashiell Driscoll that was carrying the podcast, because he had the actual fan enthusiasm. It was like pulling teeth to get the stories out of Mark Paul. So to me, like, from the start, I was just like, this just feels like a promotional tool. And when it stopped, I kind of understood that as well. It's just like, well, the series isn't continuing, but I think your point is more valid. Like, he had to find work. Like, he doesn't have time for a podcast.
See, it never felt like a promotional tool to me, but it felt like a paycheck. Like, I knew Mark Paul wasn't there for free, and he was there begrudgingly.
Yeah.
But like, there was not a ton of synergy with Peacock, and I don't know whose decision that was. Like, just with a few tweaks, it could have been like a symbiotic relationship, but that just wasn't present.
But here's what I'll say. So I listened to every episode of both the podcasts we mentioned. I listened to all 50 Zack to the Future. I too was disappointed when it stopped, but I really recommend Go Bayside, because that is just a super fun celebration by fans of the show. They obviously love it. April Richardson, talks about how she watched it over and over again, just like all of us. But what I liked about hers was she would get her fellow, celebrity comedians to come on, which was great. And by the end of the series, especially, it was gaining a lot more traction. And so she was getting, Paul F. Tompkins and people like that in the podcast space that you hear from a lot. But what was way cool about Go Bayside is she got a lot of the regular extras who were always in the background and then would start getting speaking parts. So so she was able to grab a lot of these really, like, I know that guy, or the twins, or whoever, and then like talk to them and get their stories, which a lot of times is more interesting than, again, the selective memory of the main cast, who kind of, they'll tell you what they want to tell you, but they don't give a tell-all. Like we mentioned previously, Peter Engel, everybody. Nobody's giving the whole story. It's all their perspective or what they're willing to share. So yeah, if you want a real fun Saved by the Bell rewatch podcast, Go Bayside is the one to check out, I would say. But this was a go for Bayside once again in 2020 on Peacock. Very interesting timing, which we'll get into here shortly. But why don't you give him the elevator pitch?
Well, Saved by the Bell premiered via the Peacock streaming service the day after Thanksgiving on November 25th, 2020, and even got a second season that ran until May 2022, when the series was canceled. This Saved by the Bell takes place in a different continuity than the original series, though it features the return of many of the original cast members in their iconic roles. For example, Zach Morris is now governor of California, running for re-election, and is married to his high school sweetheart Kelly Kapowski. Meanwhile, AC Slater is now the pathetic gym teacher and football coach at Bayside High School, while Jesse Spano is the guidance counselor. Conspicuously not present for the show are Dustin Diamond as Screech and Dennis Haskins as Mr. Belding. Instead, the current principal is Mr. Todman, played by John Michael Higgins.
So, Will, you kind of teased this a little earlier. Let's take a sidebar quickly just to discuss the hype that surrounded Screech not being a part of the reimagining. Mr. Belding, not so much. But we had this whole thing, where is Screech? And then the death of Dustin Diamond is mixed into all of this. So when the show was announced, I do recall, like, go back now on YouTube, even like all the, interviews with like Entertainment Weekly or whoever, like all the titles is all like, will Screech be on the new Saved by the Bell? Like that's all anybody cared about. And in the interviews, the original cast members who were now producers on this series and the showrunners, when they were interviewed, they basically all used the excuse that they were trying to focus on the lives of the new students and that they wished Dustin nothing but the best. But judging by how much screen time the old cast got, that doesn't quite mesh with what we were actually seeing. But we should say the Screech character is mentioned briefly by the original casting characters. They talk about the good old days, but that was it. And Dustin Diamond himself was interviewed by TMZ when the show was launching, saying that he thought it was a mistake on the part of the producers to not include the only character who had been on nearly every episode of the entire series, with the exception of season 1 of the new class. So I am curious, when we talk about this, you said you felt like Screech should have been a part of it, but like, was that your initial reaction? Like, how did that come about in your mind? Like, Screech needs to be here.
I definitely thought he needed to be there. Hollywood has had similar situations where it's like, think back to Three's Company with like Suzanne Summers' contract situation, where there are episodes where she just calls from home because she's got a contract to fulfill, but they're fighting, So it's like they could have done a thing like that. When they mention him in season 1, it's that he's in space. He's on the International Space Station. So it's like he still exists. He's still kind of in their orbit. And I didn't really know his relationship because it would go back and forth. That book came out so long ago, like we're talking like 15 years almost at this point. So over the years, you would hear like, oh, so-and-so has been in touch with Dustin and they settled their differences. So it was almost like maybe the group hadn't all come around, but everybody was kind of like taking their turn of like, they had their come to Jesus moment with him of like, okay, what was this about? And that's where he would say like, it was mostly ghost written. The guy who did it made up that stuff, but I didn't stop him. And it seemed like they were fine. So it's kind of like the Lisa thing or Belding. I was fine thinking that, okay, we'll get Screech in season 2. And then, unfortunately, he passed away in 2021. So we didn't get that.
For my part, I totally understood why they wouldn't want to bring in all the baggage of Dustin Diamond's post-new class shenanigans, because like that would have been the news cycle around the series launching. Like, oh, they finally made up. Oh, but what about this? Remember when Dustin did this? Remember that? Like, I just feel like it would have overshadowed what they were trying to do. Plus, I feel like the Screech character does not fit the tone of this universe. We're going to get into what that tone is, but I was not disappointed because I felt like he did with the new class. He would have taken over, and it just feels like he made the choices that alienated his castmates. So I was kind of okay with him not being there and looked forward to meeting the new cast anyway. I was like, I want to say hello to the old people, but I want to see what they're doing with these new kids.
I understand what you're saying. I just feel like we could have seen him via Zoom the same way we saw Lisa season 1. That's all I'm asking for. Because, I mean, if we're being honest here, Mario's no angel. He's just so damn charismatic that like people forget. But like you do a Google on Mario, like Mario Lopez has done some stuff.
Yeah.
So like, and that kind of came up when this was mentioned, but like when he was involved in this. So it's like I felt like he and Dustin would have almost been on even footing. And I also give Dustin a pass because he was this little kid that like he started that show when he was 11, and they were like full-fledged teenagers. So like they weren't including him in the reindeer games anyway. It's almost like when you give a nerd power, you get Elon Musk, you get a super villain. And that's what Dustin did in his own world, so it was embellishment and it hurt a lot of people, but I also understand where it came from and how most of them were able to forgive him.
Yeah, well, take us into how this ended, unfortunately.
Well, production of seasons 1 and 2 of the series were separated by 1 year, during which the COVID-19 pandemic swept the globe and Dustin Diamond died from lung cancer on February 1st, 2021. So when the series returned for season 2, the first episode dealt with the students also missing a year of school due to the pandemic lockdown, and it's insinuated that Screech died due to complications from COVID in a scene where the original cast gathers in a booth at the Max to reminisce about their friend. Adam, how did you feel about this scene?
So like I said, even though I understood why they would not maybe feel comfortable inviting him back, this scene felt very disingenuous to me. Because it's like, you don't invite a friend who's been making some bad life choices to your wedding, but then you show up at his funeral to save face. That's what it felt like to me. Like, it would have been such a nice cap on the series to have had the Screech cameo appearance on a screen like Lisa. Like you said, I agree. They probably could have found a way to do that to show they had buried the hatchet, if that was really what was happening for the most part. But instead, it came off like you were just saying. The cool kids were excluding the dork from their reunion. It didn't feel bad about it until it was too late. That whole scene, it doesn't sit right with me, unfortunately. Like, I'm glad they did it. They do this whole montage of clips from the original series, to give that tribute to him, but I don't know if it made up for, not including him, probably. So
yeah, you and I discussed this like when talking about this whole event, where one thing that's always, I won't say impressed me, but it's been kind of like unusual to me, is the solidarity amongst this cast, where they almost operate as a unit. So it was like when Dustin did his thing, they were off to the other side, and it was almost like a group statement. They all seemed to treat him the same. So in this situation, like you're saying, it wasn't earned, even though, I mean, like, history's written by the winners. Like, they all claim they settled their differences before he passed away, especially Mario. But it would have been nice to have seen some product of that on screen. Now, I will say, I did not get the insinuation that he passed from COVID. Even though it's in an episode having to do with COVID, I felt it was very open-ended, and I didn't like that because it felt like a cop-out, but it also contributes to this whole thing feeling disingenuous, like you're saying. It was very reminiscent, and this is me going down a rabbit hole here, but there was an NBC sitcom called Suddenly Susan with Brooke Shields and Judd Nelson and all that. And there was an actor on there, cast member David Strickland, who played the character of Todd, who committed suicide. But what happens is he passes away in the middle of the season, so they have to continue shooting. There is an episode that is a tribute to him, but what happens is the entire episode, everybody's trying to find him, and they all meet up at Susan's apartment, and while they're trying to find him, they're reminiscing over adventures they had together, hint clip show, like we got here with Screech, but they just have this feeling in the pit of their stomach. They don't know what happened, but they just feel like something happened to Todd. And the episode ends with the phone ringing. And it's to imply, this is the bad news they were waiting for. When the next episode happens, we don't talk about Todd again. That was our goodbye to Todd. And it has bothered me. That was over 20 years now. But it's one of the worst handled tributes to a real life death. Because unfortunately in that era, it happened quite often, especially for NBC. We're talking Phil Hartman. Those shows took a hit, and most shows knew how to walk that line. But it's the C plot of the season premiere that's already doing a lot of post-COVID heavy lifting. Because a big issue with this episode, it acknowledges COVID in that they lost a year, but this was filmed at the end to make things work. So once you get past the first 3 episodes, they don't acknowledge that they've lost a year. This is part of damage control because of what happened in the real world. So it's a further slap in the face to Screech to me.
Yeah, They do leave it open-ended because they basically just say a lot of people didn't make it out of the pandemic. That's basically how the line goes. So that's where the insinuation is. But this has been a little bit of a downer. We promise there are laughs and things to be discussed here. So, Will, why don't you take us into a little bit more of an explanation about the series itself?
Well, returning to the characters that actually did make an appearance on the show, the legacy characters do have children who now attend Bayside in the form of Jesse Spano's son Jamie, a clueless coddled jock, and his friend Mac Morris, played by Mitchell Hoog, the son of Zach and Kelly, who has taken his dad's scheming to sociopathic levels. Also in the mix is their reality TV star friend Lexi, played by Josie Tota, a transgender girl who is at the top of the Bayside social ladder. These characters still hang out at the Max and make crazy bets with each other that lead to hijinks in the classic Bayside fashion.
However, where the show diverges from the original is the introduction of a group of students from the underfunded Douglas High School, which is closed down due to Governor Zach's poor management of the state's economy, leading to an influx of new students from lower-income households into the upper-class world of the Palisades. And so these new students are the neurotic, overachieving social justice warrior Daisy Jimenez, played by Haskari Velasquez, her best friend and sports star Aisha Garcia, played by Alicia Pascual Pena, and Dexter Darden as Devonte Young, a secretly talented kid who even at Douglas High was seen as a troublemaker, but really has a heart of gold. And the series deals with the socioeconomic clash between the two sets of students, with the entitled Bayside kids getting a dose of reality, while the Douglas kids have to decide whether to assimilate or fight against the system. And though this sounds like the start of a dramatic reimagining a la Bel Air, Saved by the Bell 2020, it really is silly. It's an over-the-top deconstruction of the original series universe, pointing out its more ridiculous tropes while also poking fun at the modern mentality of today's youth. It's dealing with a lot of stuff. There's a lot of tonal stuff here. So let's just start talking about what worked, Will, and let's see what we enjoyed about this show in our cheers. First off, above and beyond anything else, the show running, the writing, the new cast is fantastic. They are all very unique performers that are written with distinct dialogue. I listened to an interview with Tracy Wingfield, the showrunner. She's like, I have to find unknown, very talented kids that gel together. How is this going to happen? And I think they did it. Very specifically, though, Mitchell Hoag as Mac Morris is the first Zach Morris type character in the Saved by the Bell universe that I think the charismatic schemer tone is just right. Like, he makes every performer that he shares a scene with better with the way that he is being the crazy guy. But Daisy, in particular, who he shares a lot of time with, is also really strong as the point of view character, because she's a complete 180 from the Zach Morris type, which makes them an awesome, like, mismatched comedy duo. Every time they're on screen together, I am just like smiling because Mac is assigned as her Bayside buddy to help her acclimate to the school. And I love how he refers to her as buddy. He's like, hey, buddy. Like, it's so creepy. But by the end of the second season, it's a term of endearment, and he calls her buddy with like real heart. Like, it's his version of preppy, basically, to call her that. And they really become like confidants and best friends in a really interesting way. Even though, like, at the beginning, she thinks he's an entitled idiot, but she has a great effect on him. I love them. What do you think, Will?
To me, this show begins and ends with Lexi. Lexi is an amazing character for so many reasons.
Yeah.
She gets the best lines, but also the thing that's very important about this show to me is this is the first mainstream, even though it's not network, but show that I have seen that treats a trans character as a non-issue. We know Josie's trans because she has a reality show about being trans. She's basically like a caricature of I Am Jazz, which is a TLC show about a transgender teenager. Like, it's been on for like 10 years at this point. But also, it's just kind of like, it's gonna sound so weird, but like as a viewer, I'm really proud of her because I've seen her act prior to transitioning, and it's like she hasn't missed a step. She used to be, I bring this show up all the time, but Jessie on the Disney Channel, where prior to transitioning, her character was really in love with Zuri, which was like the youngest kid on that show, like the youngest daughter, and was like an Urkel, like constantly stalking Zuri and popping up where they weren't welcome and things like that. So it's like as a child star growing into this confident, capable teenage character, and like I said, she gets the best lines. She really commands any scene she's in. But I love certain things of like, okay, so second season, she and Jamie Spano are a couple. But when they fall in love and everything, like from what we can gather, they've been in school together their entire lives, meaning they knew her pre-transition, but that's never an issue. It's like, you're the girl I love, I'm kissing you. Nobody around them, maybe it's just because they're like ensconced in privilege. Like, it's never a thing. And I love that. In fact, like the one episode where it does become a thing is kind of clunky because the rest of the series is just been accepted. It's like the perfect, this is what society should work towards kind of deal. So in that environment created by the show, I think Lexi is the show.
Oh, 100%. Like, if it wouldn't be, at least what I still feel at this point, like a problem for the parents of the audience of the Disney Channel, she should be going back and getting her own series like Jessie. She's that dynamic and hilarious. To me, it's interesting because Lexi is truly a unique character, but she is in some ways a callback. She's kind of an amalgam of Slater and Lisa in that she's Mac's friend and rival in like the popularity wars, like playful rival, but she's also the fashion conscious gossip queen, I guess you would say.
Right.
The lines that she gets, like you say, the writing is fantastic, but she also has this lackey named Spencer who is basically her Smithers, and she's always like, shut up, Spencer, and she just abuses him, and he is so funny, like, along with her. But also there is an actual arc for the character, like her and Mac and Jamie to a lesser extent, I guess. But it's like she starts out as the cutthroat narcissist and she becomes this caring, vulnerable, still eccentric, but like a real person with real feelings. But her characterization stays intact. Even as it's evolving, she's still always at the core the same. And the writing on that and the performance is so impressive for that reason. So yeah, I mean, Lexi is amazing, but I have to say the other breakout for me is Dexter Darden as Devante, because he is such like a quirky personality. And I'm going to say from performance, I see your face, Will, so I'm going to get your take on this, but I like him a little better second season because he's put in a tricky situation in the first season. Like he does this like fake out smile to deadpan face when people are trying to befriend him, be nice to the new kid who's moving in, but he has a lot to work with because they write him. He's this guarded bad boy from the other side of the tracks. Like I said before, everybody already thinks he's trouble. Everybody he's gone to school with all these years, but he is smarter and less crazy than everybody else. He's the one who kind of sees the madness in everybody else. But so he plays the voice of reason. But it's interesting because Daisy is fighting against the injustices at Bayside. That's her like active goal. She's going to show them how it should be. But Devante, he's just kind of doing his thing, and he has to deal with everyone projecting onto him or making semi-racist assumptions about him because he's not broadcasting his thoughts and feelings about the world on a loudspeaker like everybody else. He's just like trying to exist, right? But I loved Dexter Darden when I saw this. And so when he was on this Disney Plus original movie called Chang Can Dunk, I don't know if you watched that.
I saw the trailer. I didn't know he was in it.
Yeah, he's the slam dunk mentor to the Chang kid that he finds online. But it's interesting because he plays a totally different type of character. So I was just like, oh, okay, so is he acting here? Is he playing himself? Or because he's doing a very different character over here? I don't know where he falls in, but I like that from the first season to the end, when he finally allows people into his orbit, into his world. And then by the second season, he's literally saying, I love this school. I love watching him experience all that. But Will, what is your take on the Devontae character?
Oh man, I have to double back to something you said where you were so right about Lexi, how the characterization stays consistent because I actually don't like her in season 1. I think she's evil and diabolical. I feel like I can assume where it's coming from, and like she alludes to it in like season 2 where she's been through 5 divorces and things like that, and like people don't stick with her. But like hated her season 1, season 2 she's awesome. I'm glad you mentioned Spencer, played by Abraham Rodriguez. I have to bring up Spencer because concurrently, while he's in this show less in season 1 than in season 2, he is also starring in Power Rangers Beast Morphers as the Gold Ranger. Like he starts out as like the nerdy like tech guy in the lab, and he eventually becomes a ranger. So it was weird in real time because you've got him where he's like a little fey and effeminate here, and it gets even more in season 2 while they're trying to make us think that he and the Yellow Ranger are a couple in Power Rangers, and I'm just kind of like, he's closer to his Saved by the Bell persona than his Power Rangers persona, so it just gave me whiplash in real time when I was watching these shows. But I was gonna say Devontae didn't work for me. You're bringing me around, and this might spill into Jeers a little bit. The show suffers from too many POV characters because we're led into this with Daisy is supposed to be our Zach Morris. When the schools merge from Douglas, we get Devontae, Daisy, and Aisha. And over time, we lose Daisy and Aisha to the craziness of Bayside. By the end of season 2, Devontae is really the only one we have left who is the voice of reason, but even he realizes he has succumbed to the craziness with his whole like, I love this school, I caught school fever, I don't know what this is. Now, I think if we got a season 3, he would still be like Devontae, but it's almost like, you know how when we talked about the new class and you said Megan should have been the like main character? That's where I got with Devontae, where I don't like how he's used. I feel like he should have been the main focal point character instead of Daisy, because by the end, especially when she and Mac like become whatever they are at the end of season 2, I can't take her seriously anymore. So I almost wonder if the focus might have switched in a third season, you know? So I acknowledge everything you say about him. I just don't think it was used properly.
Okay, well, I will say also just about the second season, just as a general statement, I like that we are past the integrating Douglas with Bayside stuff, because it gets more to just wacky high school adventures. Like there is an arc in the second season, which is they want to win the coveted spirit stick in a competition with Valley. I mean, it's very forced, but I like that it just devolves mostly into pure nonsense for that season, which is what Saved by the Bell should be, because the first season is very heavy with sociopolitical stuff and racial issues and all these things. It's very, very heavy on that. So what I want to talk about with you though, Will, I want to get your take because of the returning cast, the legacy cast, and you've kind of sprinkled in your thoughts in previous episodes. I do think that Mario Lopez as lovable loser Slater is the strongest, because to me, it's very in keeping with the evolution of the character we've been talking about that we saw in the college years. He's no longer the star athlete. He made too many return visits to Bayside during the new class years, and he's written the best for me in terms of having a heart of gold, even though he's kind of dumb, but he has dropped most of his bad habits from the original series. And you see that he has made that evolution on purpose. Like he's trying to be better. He's succeeding in what Jesse forcefully was teaching him in the 90s, right? He says that specifically to her multiple times in several monologues as they're building their friendship back up. So look, he's not professionally or socially advanced, but AC Slater is no longer a sexist pig. And Mario Lopez, he's likable, and I like that he was game to play the dummy. He didn't want to be cool guy. He's like, no, I'll be stupid. I'll be pathetic, you know, and I like that he was willing to go there.
He's the most genuine of the legacy characters.
Yeah.
Like, you're definitely right in that, like, the progression, what we've talked about, and a lot of his evolution is in season 2. Like,
Yeah.
season 1, he's just dumb. But season 2 is the premiere. He starts with, I don't believe in therapy. And by the end of the season, he's like, emotional Slater thinks this, but pervert Slater would be on you right now. It was like he has a lot of growth in just 10 episodes rather than the whole 20. So I definitely like what he brought to the show. I felt we could have gotten a little more from Elizabeth Berkley, but that might have been a third season thing. I feel like she's where that character would be, but I need to see her get her groove back.
I do want to give props also just to the look of this show. This is a beautiful show. It's well shot. It really expands from what we're used to on Saved by the Bell, just like the classroom sets, the hallway sets. You get to see the outside of the Max for the first time. That's not a drawing in some sunglasses, right? So I like the editing. It's very bright, but it's very quick cuts, but it's very well paced in how they time the jokes and things like that. So I just think from a production standpoint as well, it's very enjoyable to watch. We love the old show, but the video is not great.
Right.
This is definitely an upgrade.
And speaking of the old show, I love the Easter eggs. Like, there were some in season 1, but season 2, like, really,
Yeah.
I mean, the first time Slater's in therapy and he's like, did I have a mom? I remember my mom was mentioned. Did I have a mom? It's like poking fun back at, like, or when they're reminiscing, like, the flashbacks of, like, all the times Jesse and Slater tried to get back together. It's like, there was that time at the beach club. It's like, no, we can't afford a Stacey Carosi flashback.
Yeah.
But even, like, I don't know if you noticed, but Todman has a degree from Stansbury.
Oh,
Like, that's what's on his wall. So it's like, he went where Jesse couldn't go, Or how Mac was using the Paul Revere tape of his father to brainwash all of the kids of Bayside. Like, things like that. Like, I loved, because there wasn't a lot of that in season 1, but they really embraced the franchise in season 2.
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And I do want to mention, I don't want to say she's not a highlight of the series for me. I think she's great. The Aisha character is probably underserved. Like, she gets a lot of screen time and she does a lot of stuff, but she doesn't make as big a comedic impact, I guess is what I would say for the show. Like, she is a great stalwart character for the cast. I just feel like maybe because in season 2 they try to do like, okay, she's dealing with, is she bi or is she just, a lesbian, whatever is going on, like, and so she has that relationship and that's kind of where they take it, but that's more dramatic. Like, she doesn't get a lot of comedy really throughout the series. So
most of her comedy was in season 1, but it's a lot of that, like, sister girl black punch up comedy.
Yeah.
It's like she's there to kind of accent a joke that maybe wasn't gonna land, but, like, I kind of like the direction they took her, but it was at the expense of comedy.
Yeah, so we're kind of getting into that area. So I think it's time we take a look at maybe what didn't work or what could have been improved in our jeers.
Boo! Boo! Boo!
Go for it.
Theme song.
Yes.
I hate the theme song.
Terrible.
We went through this era in the mid-teens to 2020 where it was like, for some reason, Lil Yachty was the guy they would call to crap on a theme song. Like, he did this one, but he also redid the Teen Titans Go theme song for their movie. Like, I don't know whose Rolodex he was in, but I hate the theme song. It's not iconic. It's not an earworm. It doesn't stick with you. It makes you long for the old one, which is why I love the Nick of Time episode. It's just kind of like, that's such a great concept, but the theme song is terrible.
Yeah, I always skip intro when I watch the episodes. I don't need that theme song. I would have preferred just a new song altogether or just an instrumental, anything but that, because the rhythm is off, the new melody is not good. It's bad. But I think the biggest thing about this show for me, the flaw, Tracy Wingfield basically has said this in her whole concept of why she was doing this show, how she pitched it, is that the purpose of the series seems to be to convince the audience that they were idiots for liking the original show and admiring these characters who were actually terrible human beings. Like, half the jokes are, remember how stupid and bad things were in the 90s? Which, that's just a slap in the face to all of the old school fans. We're there for the nostalgia. We wanted to celebrate our childhoods. And like you're saying with the Easter eggs, like, we can grab that maybe, but that's about all they give us for a lot of it. And at a certain point, we have Todman is digitally inserted into scenes from the original series as a fellow student who was there with the Bayside Gang with Zach and Kelly and Slater and Lisa and everybody for the most important moments of the show, but he is ignored by everyone apparently except for Lisa when they zoom with her to verify that he even went to Bayside. She's like, Ron, I love that guy. The idea that they were overlooking his entire existence, and they have a big argument in the principal's office between all the main cast, and they're calling each other selfish, and he comes in and he says, you're all selfish. You didn't even remember me. And it just puts a button on the warped characterizations that they have given us to say none of these people should be idolized or admired. And it's rough.
Yes, it's the Tracy Wigfield, Tina Fey technique of all of those shows take place in another timeline where absurdity kind of runs amok, and there's usually one straight man who's your POV character. Whether it's Liz Lemon, it's like, man, everything around here is crazy and I'm the only sane one, but because I acknowledge that, no one else realizes I'm the same one, I'm now miserable. And there's a little of that in Daisy, but also it's just like that colored the universe, which is kind of why I agree with you that Screech wouldn't fit, because he is that universe personified. It's fine in one person, but when it runs amok, because they're all playing exaggerated versions of themselves. Mario Lopez as Loser Slater works. It makes sense. Where Jesse is in life works. We don't get enough of like Lisa, but I do not like the Morris family at all. Mark Paul is playing the Zach Morris's trash version of Zach Morris. And like, I'm going to blame Daschle for that. You know, it's like, he didn't have to be that guy. Zach Morris's natural progression would not be governor of California. And if he were governor of California, I think he would have succeeded. But like, because it's the Zach Morris's trash, absurd caricature of Zach Morris, he's governor. He's a horrible governor. And now he's going to be a substitute teacher at the school. Then you got Kelly, where Kelly, they took her kindness to be dumbness.
Yeah.
Like, she's no longer kind. In the original series, she's kind and maybe not the smartest thing. But now she is not really kind. And maybe she was never kind. It was just she was dumb. So it's like season 1, you've got the whole thing of she's running around calling herself a doctor, which is offending Jesse because she's like, I actually worked for my title, but she's like selling like holistic stuff. She's basically like an MLM yoga teacher for the most part. But then in season 2, you've got like, oh, she wants to take the MCATs and she wants to become a real doctor. But this caricature you have created cannot hack it in med school. At best, she could go to nursing school, but she was not a doctor. You know, like they didn't build that character, but just there's a toxic relationship between her and Zach. There's a toxic relationship between Zach and Mac. I don't like what they've done with the Morris family for the sake of this wacky Tracy Wigfield absurd world they live in.
Yeah, because what it made me realize is, yes, okay, the characters made bad choices or they weren't always kind to each other. Zach was taking advantage of people. But by the end, he learned his lesson. Like, yes, he would do it again. He would find other schemes, but like his friends were there to kind of bring him back to reality and say, like, should you really be doing that? What I realized is when they were teenagers on the show, they were sincere. They were playing slightly amplified versions of their true selves, but now that they're coming back, yeah, they're just making fun of the characters they played. There is no sincerity, and that's what I think we all connected to. Because like in that unauthorized Saved by the Bell book that I have that I was telling you about, like you read everything about Mario Lopez, they just took everything about him and wrote it into Slater. Like all of the characters pretty much were like the stuff they did on the series. A lot of it was real life to the actors, and they're not good comedic actors. That's the problem. Coming back, they're not funny. And it could be the writing. Maybe they're capable of it, but I don't see it.
I felt Zach got better in season 2. I hated any time Kelly came back. She didn't work. Her jokes didn't work. There's a joke in season 1 where she alludes to the fact that Mac might actually be Jeff from the Max's son.
Yeah.
You know, it gets lost because her delivery's not great. But like you're saying, it lacks sincerity. And the crux of the original series was they all came together as friends and helped each other out. And that is another jeer I have for this show, in that season 2, like, even though there's the overarching, like, Spirit Fest thing where they're trying to win the stick, which I also hated. Like, I wish it were more, like, self-contained, because once the premiere ended, I realized, oh, we didn't finish that Spirit thing. And then they drag it out for the next 9 episodes.
Yeah.
But part of the issue, while that should have brought the gang together, I don't know if you realize this, there aren't many situations with them together. There are couplets and there are silos throughout that season, but everybody's working on their own stuff, where it's like Jamie almost doesn't matter. He kind of comes back in the season finale to put a stamp on the season, but his character does nothing all season unless he's interacting with Lexi. And then you've got Devontae, like you said, he does his own thing, which kind of brings his girlfriend into the mix, but it's like Violet. You know, it's like she might hang out with them, but she's not really part of the gang. And then you've got Aisha dealing with her stuff. And then you got Daisy dealing with her new crush and her family and all that, until you get to like the obstacle course stuff in the season finale. And even then, like, I just feel they don't gel as a full unit this season. And like, that is the strength of Saved by the Bell. Like, for all their differences and all of their like feuds and fights, they have each other's backs. But like, there were alliances that like were under an umbrella of a friendship, but there's not, like, for example, Aisha and Lexi settle their differences of like, why are you so weird around me? Well, probably because you took my boyfriend the week after we broke up, you know? But then you don't really see Aisha kind of reconcile with Jamie, because there's still some awkwardness there, but they don't even really see each other because you really only see Jamie interacting with Lexi. It's very disjointed.
Well, speaking of Jamie, because you've mentioned him several times, I did not bring him up in Cheers. He is definitely a part of my jeers. The Jamie character is terribly written and conceived, because 95% of the time, he's the dumbest human being on earth, except when he starts dating Aisha. And suddenly, he's the most caring, emotionally wise, sensitive boyfriend ever. He just suddenly becomes like he's on 90210 or something. Like, it changes the tone. And they could have saved it somehow, I think, if they said like, oh, well, he plays dumb to fit into the whole vibe of Bayside or something. But he's a character of convenience. He's there to do whatever they need a hot guy to do, but he's like the least essential character of the cast. Because again, like, they flip him so many times where he becomes like, oh yeah, man, I totally understand that. And here's why we should, you know, and you're just like, wait. But you were just talking about eating soap the other, like, I don't understand how you could be both.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of like dumb Jamie in season 1, but like, I was kind of okay with it because I know that guy. Like, there are a lot of dumb people with emotional intelligence, you know? Season 2 is just not great for him because he's given nothing to do. We're supposed to think he's trying to figure out how to navigate his parents' divorce, but they just don't give him anything to do. So like, my whole deal is we're supposed to interpret that he was primarily raised by Jessie, and Jessie kind of cultivated his emotional intelligence. She was going to make sure her kid was going to be the anti-Slater. He was going to be caring and sensitive and all of that. And it seems like even her like estranged husband might have gotten in the way with that. We know that I think he was an artist. We don't know a ton about him, but it seems like she was very much a helicopter mom, and they have like a special bond, and he got that from her. So it's like he might not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I feel like that emotional intelligence was kind of always there. It just needs reasons to shine. You especially see that in the season 2 episode when she has to tell him about the divorce, and he immediately switches to, "You're just trying your best, Mom," and like she realizes he's so much more mature than she was at his age, because when her mom had the same conversation with her, she like lost it and thought that like her mom was losing it. They ate popcorn chicken at the gas station for dinner because mom forgot to get groceries, and it's this like this traumatic memory for her that like has colored her adulthood, and she didn't want to do that for Jamie, but then she learns that he's so much stronger than she ever was. So there's a lot there. For example, the fact that he's Jamie Spano, but she is married. She did not have him as like a single mom. So what's that about? We never get into that, but like, I mean, American law would default to it would be the father's name, So there's a lot of potential to Jamie, but he is done a disservice in season 2.
Yeah, definitely. I do want to say on the Jamie side, this probably should have been in Cheers, but he has a teammate. He kind of has his version of Spencer, which is this guy Colt. And Colt is like, one of the fellow jocks, and he's pretty funny. Like he just kind of usually comes in with the non sequiturs. Like he just shows up and shouts something ridiculous out, So I like him as a presence, as another like C tier regular, he's there, but he's definitely not the main guy. But when I look at this series as a whole, I think we are back to the beginning here with the Miss Bliss pilot conundrum. Who is this show for? Is it for people in their 40s who love the original series, or is it trying to appeal to modern day teens, none of whom I believe are watching Peacock if it's not for Megan to watch that for the 20th time, or Five Nights at Freddy's? Like that's why people that are the age of these characters would be, subscribing to Peacock if they're doing that at all. So when you look at it, if it had been on network TV, it might have had a shot to appeal to modern teens, but I don't think they're watching network TV. So even that, but on streaming, the show was kind of a lost cause. It's gonna get buried. I don't think Peacock is one of the top services. I could be wrong about that. But like, then you think about our generation wanting to follow up with the old cast. The only thing that's going on here is what I feel is a very uninteresting storyline that always drags down an episode. Jesse's marriage falling apart. And they spend a lot of time with Elizabeth Berkley, who is not nailing her jokes. And they do like a Showgirls reference.
I love that episode. Like, I love Showgirls, like, unironically. And like, everything I love about that movie was referenced. She says Versace. She hits all those notes.
It's great that she did it, but the fact that they had to fall back on that because they couldn't find a new road for Jesse is what I don't like about it. The rest of the cast returning, yes, they're just extended cameos, especially in the first season. And whenever those cameos happen, I just feel like it is a distraction from the real draw of the show, which is the new kids, because they're so great, because Lexi is so amazing, because I love Mac Morris. Like he is great as the American Psycho version of Zach Morris. He's really lost it. But like, so it just basically just comes down to them telling us that, you 90s kids, society has moved so far beyond you that you wouldn't recognize the high school experience today. And these kids think you're an embarrassment. It doesn't work because it's unbalanced in that way. Just like, is it about Miss Bliss and her personal life, or is it about the kids? Luckily, they chose the kids and they made the right choice. Here, they're kind of stuck with the legacy characters. And, as the Jesse and Slater relationship develops towards the end of season 2, you're like, okay, maybe we're okay with this, but still, you're relying too much on them. They should be pop-in characters.
You're right. It doesn't know who its audience is. And that goes back to my whole issue with Tracy Wigfield and Tina Fey. What's our catchphrase on this show? We're too smart for TV. And that is Tina Fey's entire MO. Like, if you watch Tina Fey's shows, they're not ratings darlings because they talk down to middle America. Like, the fact that 30 Rock lasted as long as it did is somewhat of a miracle. But if you look at anything else she does, Girls 5 Eva, Great News, like all these shows, it's like critics love them. They're hip and they're witty and lightning fast quips, but like Big Bang Theory is still the #1 show on television for 12 years while this is happening. That is what people like. Arrested Development had that same issue. People would say like, oh, it's too smart for its audience. That's a problem. And the joke for Saved by the Bell 2020 is look how dumb this thing was. Like, that's what it is. And it's like, it'd be one thing if they got that out during the pilot and then they take it in a new direction, but they're still on that in season 2. So it's not giving me what I want as a Peter Engel devotee, but it's also not really giving me what I want as like, I'm a Tina Fey fan. Like, as low rated as her stuff is, I know what I'm getting into. I just don't think it works for this because a lot of her stuff, and that's a problem we said was going on with this show, it lacks sincerity. She comes from a world of smuggery. It's like, I'm the smartest one in the room and I can't deal with you idiots and I'm gonna make it work. And that has colored every project. I mean, whether it's Sarah Bareilles' character in Girls 5 Eva, I follow her career, so I know what Tracy Wigfield's been doing from like Mindy Project and her resume. I didn't think it was going to be the right flavor for this show. So this is one of those deals of like, and they probably had discussions. If there were a third season, I'm seeing new showrunner because shows replace showrunners all the time. Wigfield got 2 seasons, but it would have to have gone in a new direction for a third season.
Well, let's talk about that, Will. I'm sure we have a few more notes that we could offer as the show doctors. So I do think the cast is so strong. The new cast, I think they are funny. I think the writing for the most part is funny. What you were saying with the smuggery, it does fall into some unhappily very mean comedy, like about pop culture figures. Like Lexi especially will say some really biting things about people. And you're like, I don't think we needed to go that far.
You know about the Ariana Grande scandal, right?
No, what happened there?
Oh, not Ariana Grande. Selena Gomez. Selena Gomez had a kidney transplant and nobody knew who gave her this kidney. So there are a couple jokes in season 1 where Lexi implies that she was the one who donated her kidney to Selena Gomez. And there was backlash from Selena Gomez fans to the point where those jokes have been removed from Peacock.
Wow.
Yeah, and then we later found out it was Selena Gomez's best friend who gave her the kidney because that whole saga of the Saved by the Bell kind of zhuzhed up the truth and they had a falling out because once she gave her the kidney, Selena went back to her partying ways. That shows you how the show went too far. It had real world consequences.
Wow, I had no idea. Yeah, so yeah, because that's where I think we need to maybe take a step back from that type of stuff. But I would also say, first things first, it was our first year. Give the show an original theme song. So we need to revamp, give them something that says this is their show now. This is about the kids. We're going to reduce the original cast cameos to maybe like one episode with Jesse and Slater. They could pop in here and there, but they don't even really need to be in this. Todman has to go. I didn't put him in Jeers. I love John Michael Higgins. I like him in the Christopher Guest films. I don't like him as Todman. He is too stupid. Mr. Belding could be tricked. He could be manipulated, but he was still a competent principal. Todman is a complete lunatic and does not belong in that situation. And so I want him out of here. But I just feel like the novelty of having the original cast is gone. By season 3, you don't need them. For diehards, they could bring back Tori. Finally, you know, like she gets a mention in season 1. They make an offhanded joke about that. But like, other than that, like they really needed to move on, let the kids take the spotlight, but also it needs a more visible platform. I don't usually go to like what network it belongs. That's your secret power. I know this, but I think if it could have been picked up by Netflix and you build it up, So people binge the first 2 seasons and then they look forward to the 3rd season on Netflix premiering. I think it might have stood a chance to get an audience because to promote it, what they needed to do, again, if this is going to be for the modern audience, if this is going to be for kids that age, you have a social media campaign where the old cast is competing against the new cast in contests revolving around 90s trivia, 90s video games, doing 90s song karaoke, because all that's coming back in the modern culture anyway, right? So I feel like that would be very fun. And it all culminates on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. There's a final contest, and then it leads into the season 3 premiere. But like clips are going all over TikTok and everything else. And it just builds a buzz, which I don't think they ever did with this series. And then when it comes back, it's like, yeah, this is for your generation now. And they just retool it to say it's still silly, but it's not smug. And it still reflects what kids are going through now in the Bayside thing, but it doesn't lean heavily into making fun of 90s culture and what it was. You start giving it its own tone and its own flavor. I think that is where it had to go in season 3. But what do you think?
You're right in that it didn't build a buzz. Like, I've thought really hard, like, what failed here. I would bring in a new showrunner. You got to soften it a little, round out the edges. It can still be kind of biting, but it's too edgy. I agree you got to phase out the legacy characters because that's what 90210 had to do on the CW. It's like after season 2, you don't really see the old people anymore. It's the new hot ones, like the Peach Pit's still there, but the old ones resolves their issues. Same thing here. I would like to see a Tori. Here's a jeer, and I know we're in the next section, but it kind of is where I would take the show. It's a slap in the face to me, to the fans, and to the man himself that Dennis Haskins did not make an appearance in those 2 seasons. I'm actually more offended for him than Dustin because that man has been a cheerleader for Saved by the Bell since it ended. When I had COVID, there was the Bowie Bay Sox having Saved by the Bell night where he was there, meet and greets and everything, and I couldn't meet Mr. Belding because I was sick. So I would bring him back as the superintendent, which, as we saw at the end of the 2nd season, is where the show is headed anyway. So I would bring Haskins back as the superintendent. We would last see Zach Morris in the season premiere when he loses his bid for that job. And then we just keep it going. The cast is great. The plot, for the most part, is good. Then you have to double back to the pilot. If I'm not mistaken, they establish a timeline in the very beginning that this is like a 3-year experiment. So it's like it was canceled prematurely, but like for what was going to happen with the district reorganization or whatever, the Douglas kids being at Bayside had an end date to it. So then it's like at the end of season 3, you can get to that end date, and then what happens? Because now you've got these 3 kids, part of the cast, who have really come to love Bayside, and now they're basically being forced to go home, but it's a Donna Martin graduate situation of, we got to keep them at Bayside so they can have their senior year, that kind of deal. I really wouldn't change too much, but kind of like you were saying, my biggest issue is I don't know where to put it. Because Peacock wasn't it, Netflix isn't it, network isn't it, social media isn't it. The closest thing I can come up with, even though it doesn't work from a business standpoint, this is the kind of show that you would put on TBS. If TBS was still in the primetime comedy business, maybe air it with American Dad, because that's like the only original programming they still have going. Because basic cable, you can now say and damn, like they were saying in this show. When American Dad moved, they added all that into it. So it's like that is the TBS vibe now. So considering TBS's like long history with the franchise, it would have been before the Warner Brothers Discovery merger, so they would have thrown some money at it of like Saved by the Bell is coming home, even though it is an NBC production. I think that would have been the best home for it.
Interesting. I trust your judgment on that one. I feel like you know what fits these days in those spaces, so that's for sure. But yeah, we like the show. There's just those little pieces that need to be, excised, be, pushed out. And I like your saying rounding the edges and just making a little bit more acceptable there. But overall, this has really been a fun series. Doing this Saved by the Summer, I mean, I really enjoyed it, just going in depth. I've learned so much more about the Saved by the Bell universe. The 7 seasons of the new class alone, was so eye-opening to me. But to just re-examine everything is what this show is about. So I'm glad that we were able to share this summer with everybody and do that. But it has ended. Yes, the sunset is going down at Malibu Sands. It's time to return to our regularly scheduled programming. So next time around, we'll be singing a different tune as we return to the 80s with our denim jackets and microphones in hand to discuss the 9-season wonder that was Kids Incorporated. You know the name, but how much do you truly remember about Kids Incorporated? You're going to find out next time. But until then, class dismissed.
This has been a presentation of Geekster Media.